Hey everyone, welcome to our impromptu keynote conversation about indie games, intersections, things that matter, and the future. We want to give a shout out to Robin Hunicke, who wasn't able to give us her wonderful keynote because she has laryngitis, unfortunately. But we will do our best to have a conversation around these interesting intersections and the future. My name is Tracy Fullerton. I am a professor and director emeritus of the USC Games program, also an experimental game designer, and a long time, I guess, friend of IndieCade and the indie games community. I am here I believe because of that. I believe because of the I think I am representing, I hope I'm not entirely representing the past, but I'm representing that path that led us here, if you will. And I am joined today by two young folks who I think represent perhaps where the path is going. And so I would like to have, why don't I pass it to Jake first to introduce himself.
Hi, thanks, Tracy. I'm Jake Weidner. I'm a producer and game designer at the indie studio Phenomena Inc. I am a multidisciplinary creator, do all sorts of stuff, wear a lot of hats. So I graduated with Hesi from UC Santa Cruz in 2018. We were in the art and design games and playable media program. Worked on Hesi's game, Juanito El Nahuelito. Great game about indigenous Mexican cultures. And now at Phenomena, I lead production and design on a variety of XR projects. I helped port Luna to a bunch of new platforms and did some narrative design work, adding a new voiceover script. I also helped with the launch of Watam, doing some marketing and playtesting and going to events. Now all of our new stuff I can't talk about quite yet, but doing a variety of XR work and also specializing in developing content for user-generated content platforms like Roblox and other games in that ilk. And I also a staffer with EGW, the Experimental Gameplay Workshop at GDC, which is a showcase where we show a bunch of novel prototypes from across the industry. And there I'm kind of working on incorporating feedback that the workshop has gotten over the years to help make the selections for the showcase more representative of experimental creators at large and try to create a more ongoing online community around experimental gameplay.
Awesome. Hesi, why don't you tell everyone who you are?
Hello, thank you, Tracy. So my name is Hesiquio Mendez, Hesi for short. I am currently a developer at Thundercloth, where they do, I would say, experimental VR experiences and games. So there I work on, right now I'm working on an announced project that they have. I've been working there for about a year now. I started as an intern. And then I'm also a co-founder of a little indie thing that is starting up from the Oculus Launchpad with a couple of friends working on a VR rap game. And then I'm also a teacher, a Pasadena City College, and recently graduated from USC like 2 months ago, and finished my thesis on culture-specific mechanics, which was a lot of fun. And what else am I? So I also graduated with Jake 2018 from UC Santa Cruz.
I think that's something we actually all share. So we all did our undergrads at UC Santa Cruz, which is cool. And then Hesi and I both did our graduate work at USC. But that's a cool connection.
I might be at USC in the future too, so we could go 3 for 3 on all of our options. Keep an eye out.
Go Slugs, go Trojans. Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, being that I sort of represent the path, I'm not going to call it the history. I'm going to call it the path that we got here. I wanted to sort of set that stage a little bit, right? And think about, how did we get to the place that we are here today talking about the horizons, if you will. And if you really think about the history of digital games, it actually began as indies, right? I mean, that is the root history of our industries. It began as people who were working independently, and they were sort of hacking and creatively, creating digital games in a world where there were no publishers, right? I mean, because sort of if you want to break down what is an indie, it's really someone working outside of the larger game industry of publishers and platforms. And so our roots, the roots of our very industry, lie in this, right? But what we currently think of as indies come after the I would say sort of have their roots in the era of digital distribution, right? I mean, it was really once you could break free of traditional publishing models that and sort of go do an end run, if you will, around traditional publishing models, that we have the breakthrough of indie games. And I would argue, as a professor at one of one of the game programs that we have in this country, many game programs that we have in this country and internationally, that at around the same time that we have the rise of digital distribution, we also have the rise of academic game programs where indie experimentation, not only in content, but also in platforms, is sort of nurtured, right? And given a place to play and to grow. And so you have this sort of, converging factors of a new marketplace and these sort of new havens of creativity emerging that gives rise in a lot of ways to what we see in the sort of indiescape, right? For me, a lot of this started for me, and we all have our history point. It's funny about the horizon, right? Because it's always from where you are, right? So from my experience, which is granted doesn't go back to the very earliest days of the industry, from my experience, where I, really got excited about the possibilities were in the very early days, I guess, of the EDW, right? When I saw things like Katamari, right? And I think, with our own experiments, when games like Cloud, which we thought of just as a experimental project at USC, went viral, right? And it was being played by people all over the world. And then even, and then followed up by games like Flow. And then of course there's games like World of Goo. And I mean, there was just sort of this explosion, right? And whenever you have an explosion like that, what happens is people exponentially jump in and start saying, oh, hey, if that can happen, then I can do it too, right? And you have this exponential growth. And while many people see that as maybe a problem because we flooded the marketplace, as an optimist, I still see that as a place for potential growth, because before we had this growth, what we had were indies who just wanted to be just like industry, and that wasn't exciting to me, right? I wanted to see indies that wanted to do things you couldn't do in industry, to push the boundaries, right? So that's why that exponential growth excites a person like me. What I would love to hear is from you guys, from what the horizon looked like when you first started thinking about indie games. What was that kernel of something in indie games that struck your heart, that struck your mind, that said, let's do this, right? Who wants to go? Who has a thought about this? How did we get here?
I've got one, but you can go,
Hesi.
Yeah, go, take it.
All right, thank you. So for me, I think it started in the 2010s, 2008s, where I first started seeing the indie. Before that, I used to, play a lot of triple A's, and that was the thing that it was popular, right? But it was not until like I started playing Castle Crashers, I was like, "Ooh, what is this?" Right? It's completely different from what I was used to playing, like Assassin's Creed. The whole Assassin's Creed series was a big thing for me. So I started to seeing that, and at the same time, I started also learning how to do programming. And I remember one of my assignments was to do a what's it called, tower defense games, and I was like, "Ooh, this is very raw," and I can see myself getting into like Castle Crashers kind of thing, right? So that to me was like the first step of like wanting to do something, approachable, or something that I could do, right? So indie games to me was like something that it was not too far from like making a AAA game, right? So that to me, that's what really got me intrigued into wanting to make use like something small and reachable, right? That was to me the powerful thing about like the first experiences on indie.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important part. Something about indie games, it's a lot like, say, indie film or alt music, right? Where you're just like, hey, I could do that. Like, they
Right,
don't even know that many chords. I could totally do that, right?
right.
How about you, Jake?
Yeah. So I was reflecting on that. I think the first, like maybe not fully recognizing who was making them at the time, but definitely looking back, like with Flash web games, yeah, in like the early and mid 2000s, playing a lot of stuff on Newgrounds and aggregate sites like Addicting Games. Like getting home every day from school, wanting to just see like, oh, is there a new Flash game uploaded? What's going on there? And that kind of, yeah, like super fast prototyping, grungy style, whatever these creators that, I mean, quickly got established, especially now, like looking back on hearing about how those Flash games got made. Plenty of them were funded, but seeing those games that could just, any idea that anyone would pop into their head, a lot of times it's derivative of some established game genre, but a lot of times it's not. So that was exciting, and I compare that a lot to everything I see now on these UGC platforms and the stuff on itch. But I think a big turning point for me was was booting up the PlayStation Network store for the first time in like middle school and seeing Flower on there and being like really connecting with that. I'm just like, wow, this really expressive, beautiful game, like really emotionally kind of intimate and reflective. And yeah, just fell in love with that game, and it made me really consider like just the scale that I mean, obviously that game does have a pretty significant scale in terms of a well-polished indie game, but comparing that to kind of action-oriented AAA games I was familiar with, it definitely made it, yeah, feel more accessible in a certain degree, but also realizing that it can be something different. It doesn't have like, kind of opened up that perspective of games as this culturally valuable thing to me, and wanting to share that with people, and like wanting to show my mom the game and
Yeah,
photos and family and friends and all that. I'm just like, hey, there's the game. These games can be more stuff, which now seems like a simple thought, but it was really significant to me at the time.
yeah, and that was a big part of the point, right? I mean, so we've talked a little bit about how indie games, one of the things that makes them call to new creators is they look like you can do it. Hey, we can all do it. It's rough, it's small, I can do it, right? But then what you're sort of getting at is something more, which is that they call to us culturally, right? Those early games that you're talking about, so Flow, Flower, Cloud, those early games had a purpose. The experience goal that was set for them was that they would be open and inclusive to new audiences. That was actually, thought out beforehand. That was part of their design, their design pillars, right? So I think that's important to think about in the development of some forms of indie games, where the very idea at the root was to diversify the audience for games, right? To say, hey, someone looks at this and it's your mom or it's your grandma, and they are someone's got like a buzz. Just check your mic.
Need to mute. Sorry, my computer fans are pretty loud.
Okay. But yeah, so to open it up and to share our love of games through these indie games with new audiences, right? I want to sort of, as we're talking about one of the things that make us love indie games, make us want to make indie games, that sort of, both historically, and in a minute we'll start talking about the future of indie games. I want to actually put out a challenge to you guys, and also to the audience, to our wider audience, to think about what is the rallying cry for you for indie games? So you just think about that. Like what are your kind of power words that you send out when you think about, okay, let's go make indie games, right? Why are we doing it? What are we going to do, right? So you think about that. We're going to share your ideas at the end of the session, but I also want the audience to think about it so they can share their rallying cries for indie games at the end of this session. We're going to make a little bit interactive, right? Just for fun, right? Okay, so thinking about going back to the roots of what made us want to do, make indie games, play indie games, love indie games. Let's segue into thinking about when we look at indie games today, what makes us hopeful, what makes us excited, what reinvests us in that love that we first felt for indie games. Who wants to jump in? I'm sure I will have plenty to say, but I don't want to monopolize. So maybe Hesi, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen happen at work and overall is the finding in VR specifically, in terms of like the indie parts of VR. It's been the performance part of VR, right? Being in a space, in a digital space where people can play pretend, right? Like I think this was a big thing that we did as kids, and now we can do it again virtually. So I think that to me has definitely have a lot of big impact and what I think can do, right? Like theater performance is a big thing from work, right? Thunderclaws became a huge pivot point in terms of VR and trying to innovate that part of like what would it be like to be to have a performance, a theater performance in VR, and they were able to
for
do
anyone
it. So,
who's not familiar, do you want to sort of give the premise of, say, Tempest, for example?
yes. So sorry. The game that I was talking about is Tempest from Thunderclaws, and Tempest is a virtual place where it's a multiplayer game where people can join in. You don't talk, but you can communicate with different gestures. So people are this like masked beings where people can communicate in different ways, and in that place there are live performances. So Thunderclaws was able to get some people from some theater people and perform and do some improvisations with the players, right? So I think that was a big moment, and then from then Tempest was able to do a bigger show, a Shakespearean show eventually. So yeah, that's what a little bit of what Tempest is.
As a player, Hesi, I just want to say that it was really one of the most, I don't know, touching, I guess, interactive VR experiences that I've had. Like I've had a lot of fun with things like Beat Saber, or Vader Immortal or whatever. But in terms of touching me, being part of the performance was one of the most beautiful experiences that I've ever had. And when at certain points, they actually, so you go in as an audience, right? But then at certain points, they dub you to be certain characters and you get a prop. And, there's something about being sort of chosen. It goes back to your playground
Right,
game.
right.
And you're chosen.
Yes.
And you get a little hat, or I got to be the king, so I got a crown, and you're like, you chose me and I get to play this. It's so great, and it feels lovely, right? It just feels lovely when you're chosen to play these parts, and then it's simple enough so that it's not it isn't a like traditional game, but it has so much play in it. And this is one of the things we wanted to get to, I think, this intersection, right, of role playing and games and, where we're going. I don't know if anyone saw Dream, the online Midsummer I think it's, yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream performance by the Royal Shakespeare Company recently. But that also had this sort of beautiful breaking of the fourth wall, where it's essentially a performance done in motion capture that the audience can participate in. You play the fireflies in the audience. You can throw fireflies and light the way of the characters. Sort of simple, but beautiful. And then towards the end, they break the fourth wall and sort of show you the motion captured actors. And there's this, it's hard to explain, but it's very moving to see what you've been watching being performed. And again, so it's all done actually in Unreal. I believe it's Unreal, and motion capture, and then some custom software so that you can play the fireflies. Very simple, very interesting intersection between these platforms and sort of more and intersecting with the sort of traditional theater group. I mean, these are just fascinating avenues for indie game developers to think about, models for us to think about, right? Yeah. So anyways, I love the work you guys are doing at Tender Claws. Very excited to see what you announce next. How about you, Jake? What are some thoughts that you have about things that make you hopeful and about the future of indie games?
Yeah, so I think that kind of intersection of mediums is a big one for me. The theater, performance, interactivity, installation art, role-playing, all these things coming into games. I think, still being pretty fresh out of a university program and going back to speak at a lot of college and high school level classes. I think just with how much interest there is in learning game development, there are so many new perspectives coming into it, and that leads to novelty, which I'm just absolutely obsessed with, is seeing new perspectives, new concepts, thematic, aesthetic, gameplay, any kind of new addition to the space. Another thing that makes me particularly hopeful and excited is people developing their audiences, like with the itch.io bundles, especially this new queer games bundle has been great in terms of seeing these new up and coming creators. They're making these really unique, specific personal games. And just this fire hose of creativity and personal expression that's coming from all the new creators, and then people finding each other and supporting each other to build stuff and figuring out what that ongoing development will look like.
I love that idea of bundles, right? Because that is something I think really unique to indies, that at the drop of a hat, they can combine companies. I mean, you just jump in a bundle, right? There's no negotiation. You just jump in a bundle for, we were part of the massive bundle for racial justice that Itch did last summer, right? And so happy to do that, right? This idea of indies joining together to put their games, out there for a cause is brilliant, beautiful, and it really is something that makes you really hopeful for the future. I saw online some folks chiming in about games with anti-capitalist narratives in the indie space, which made them excited, which is a really interesting thought. I personally, that's a lot of what the narrative of Walden is about. My indie game is really trying to get us to understand our motivations. Why do we need to level up and get more stuff all the time, right? So at the core of that is really a critique of specifically materialism, and so that's exciting. And I see some other folks talking about experimental games. Again, totally touching my heart, right? That is something that is very exciting. I want to echo what they're saying in the chat. This idea of constraint creates creativity, 100%, 100%. And that's the beauty of indie games, right? Is that we are by our nature constrained. Therefore, if we are constrained, make it a benefit. Make it a feature, right? Allow that constraint to box you in a way that makes you blossom some really elegant and simple idea, right? So
Get
I think
cozy
that's
in the box and figure out how you want to break out of it.
Absolutely. I'm 100% for that. So folks, keep adding in the chat your thoughts and things that make you feel hopeful about the future of indie games. We're going to switch because I think any good discussion has to always acknowledge the other side of things. We're going to talk a little bit about perhaps what makes us wary or scared or apprehensive about the future of indie games for just a moment. We're not going to get too dark, so no trigger warnings. Just gonna like talk a little bit about things that maybe aren't so rosy in the land of indie games. Does anyone want to jump in on this topic?
I can get started with, as I've talked about, getting more and more involved in like spaces around user-generated content platforms. One like huge looming topic there is the ownership of creators getting like bought into these systems that are proprietary, built by a company that totally owns the platform. Release kind of, at least currently, dictates the terms of how that's monetized. I think the big thing for me is like most of those platforms are intended to get new people into the habit of creating things, learning in an accessible way, and kind of building up that, or at least as I see it, a cross-platform interest in making games. I think those things can coexist together, but I'm definitely wary, a little wary from setting so stuff there, but mostly just trying to keep an eye out for that, advocate for the developers making things there, and hopefully as these platforms grow and those developers are the ones responsible for making these platforms so huge, they're able to set some degree of their own terms on the benefit that they get out of it. But that's one thing that makes me hesitant about the space that I'm in.
Sure. I mean, honestly, this is true of all creators, right? But I hear what you're saying in terms of platforms, especially, if you want your game to be seen, you want to be on a larger platform, right? Those platforms are going to take royalties at a certain percentage. If you want to be seen even more and you're going with somehow are able to go with a publisher, then that's a plus and minus, right? So are they going to take your IP, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And, generally that's part of the deal, right? So it's tough. I mean, you can go on an itch and you can own it all, and you can even choose what level of royalties you're going to give to itch, right? They're so open and so generous that you don't actually even have to give them anything, right? But of course, what's so interesting, what's so wonderful about a system like that is that generally people choose to give more, right? I would willingly choose to give more to other indies, which they are, than sort of begrudge the system if it forces me by taking on a lot, taking a lot of my very little profit, right? So a lot of a little is a tough thing for indies to bear.
Totally.
And of course, being seen on those platforms is difficult because there's, they're so big. Being seen is just this ongoing drudge. Like, how do you get your game to be seen on these larger platforms, right? And again, it's why a solution like an itch, it's like you can sometimes be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and do a little better there, at least for now, right? Again, there's a lot of games on itch, but it's a little bit easier to get found when you're maybe a slightly more polished indie game in the sort of smaller pond of something like itch, right?
I think a big part of it is all of like between studios and between developers and between players and content creators, like just this mutual recognition of the value that everyone is creating together, and negotiating collectively to make it a more sustainable effort, because clearly there's this huge audience and industry that's funded by all the work that's being made by it, and just being able to do advocating for each other.
It's a little interesting is that we found when at a certain point we dropped our prices for Walden and Night Journey on itch and Steam. And what it was interesting is, so on itch you can tip, right? And the minute we dropped our prices, people started tipping us the amount that we dropped it, which I was sort of astounded by, and sometimes even more, right? I mean, like sometimes we got like these massive tips, right? And I have to tell you that when I got one of those tips, then I would tell the team, we would like, I would almost cry, because I was like, this person, you know, just sees us, right? They see us, and it's so amazing that they would choose to tip us like that, you know. And like I say, in a system where it's not enforced, where it's choice, people will tend to do it more, right? I'm tending towards the light side of things again. It is my nature. But maybe Hesi, are there thoughts that you have about? I know you mentioned things around ethics that you have some concerns about.
Yeah, definitely. I think with like the coming of new technology, I think it's natural for indies to lean towards that as well, right? I think with it, though, that would be virtual reality, augmented reality, cross reality. So within that realm, one of the things that kind of worries me, it's the ethics of that, right? The ethics of owning not only information but also spaces, right? Digital spaces, the digital space on top of the physical space, essentially. So all those things, I think, for me, it's something that I think about often when new technologies come in, right? And that's within like any new technology that's coming on. It is something that I like to think about, and I think it's something that within developers we should definitely talk about. It is something that I have talked about a lot with my friends as well within the industry, right? Like, who is owning this and why are we doing this kind of things? So yeah, I think that's at least in my part of like the things that I like to think about.
I'm going to switch things up from what we and because I think that's a nice segue into a later topic, which was we wanted to talk a little bit about uh, game programs and what they've contributed to indie game culture, right? And it's a little, and I just want to segue, because I had mentioned earlier that in my mind, from my point of view in history, the rise of game programs really layers into the rise of indie games in a real significant way. And it's an important, I think, historical thing to notice, that a lot of indie games come out of or are involved with people who have studied in these programs that promote experimental design. So what I want to talk a little bit of is exactly this. So how do these game programs add to indie culture? And the reason I think it's a segue is that Hesi, you mentioned that you took a class in ethics, media ethics, that's required for MFA students at USC Games, right? I wonder if you might talk about the importance of that class in your development, and why you think that's such a critical topic, for a games program to have, and how it adds to indie culture.
Yeah, I think at least in my side, it has always been something to think about from the developer perspective, right? From design perspective, I think our choices have a big impact on our users, and that's something that I've always been intrigued about, and how like we are guiding our players in one way or another, right? So all those things kind of have always led me to think about the ethics behind things. So when I was taking the ethics class, cinematic ethics at USC, it was something that I was always excited about in the topic of things. One of the big examples is when we talked about when is it okay to talk about certain topics within our games as well, right? I'm a big creator and talking about indigenous culture, my indigenous culture, right, in my games. So I was super excited to have a case study where it was about Never Alone. So there's a case study of Never Alone and how it was really important for the culture, to be a huge part of the development process, and how important that was to not misrepresent the culture, right? So I think to me that was a big important aspect of how we think about these indie games, because I think going back to the question of something that makes me hopeful is that uh, now we have access to making games, and now everyone can tell their stories, right? So there are also times that because of that, some people may want to tell other people's story as well, as respect or otherwise, right? But I think it's reasonable to think about, like, when is it okay to actually do that, and how is it okay to do that as well, right? So I think that's, to me, the importance of this ethic classes on how we can definitely approach certain topics as well.
That's great. So, I mean, it's a great case study in how you can do ethical design and inclusive design in the case that you're talking about.
Right.
Really lovely example. And then your own work, I think, is a good example as well. And hopefully we will see a trend in this kind of inclusive design when we are telling stories of either culture, specific cultures, or the mix of cultures, or how new
Right.
stories that we haven't heard before, making sure that we're involving the people that the stories are about, which is really a lovely idea. How about you, Jake? How do you feel about the ways in which game programs today are contributing to indie game culture?
Yeah, I think a lot, again, I've already spoken on kind of just educating this new generation of creators on and empowering them to make the things that are important to them. But I think some of the classes that are really significant to me, and I think to students as a whole, well, sometimes it might take a second to recognize that impact, is stuff around kind of the cultural context of the games industry and the game making community, the history of how everything's developed, from the technology to who has been historically supported financially to make these games, who has the privilege to make them, in the background that makes it easy to make them, the critique of different trends across genres and throughout the different console cycles, and really just kind of opening everyone's eyes to the cultural impact of the fan communities, of course, with Gamergate and everything coming out of that, and that metastasizing into the continuing alt-right growth that happens a lot in the back channels of games, and even sometimes just totally openly in-game chat. I think really acknowledging those challenges, but also the things to be inspired and hopeful about throughout that. That's a big category for me. And then another one is how they're really intentional spaces to learn how to collaborate, which is something kind of every art school talks about on some degree, but especially making games, making these, you need people with different disciplines, people with totally different backgrounds, personalities, ways of making their art to come together, and learning those soft skills, and learning how they're just, totally equally as critical to developing your career as an artist as a technical skill or an art skill, and how, like, especially if you're getting hired, knowing that you're someone who's trustworthy and really thoughtful and intentional about the way that you make things and the way that you work with other people. I think those are huge contributions to the new crop of creators that the games programs have really added.
I would absolutely agree. I think you're not surprised that I would absolutely agree. I think, one of the things that games programs can do is we can look at, development culture honestly, and we can try to create solutions in our safe environment of school, or, fairly safe, we hope, environment of education. And the people that graduate will have experience developing, we hope, in inclusive and collaborative environments that are respectful, where we hopefully it's a funny thing about these issues, right? We always look to the people who are kind of outside and say, oh, it's a problem with these people. They're not right for the positions, or they're not right for our culture. It's not a fit, right? But the truth is it's a holistic problem, right? That everyone is involved in those people not fitting, right? And so, the hope would be that in university programs specifically, that training would go on for everyone, so that holistically teams could better function in an inclusive, respectful way. And when they go to industry, they would have that training that will allow them to make change in the industry. um, and so that's the dream, I think. So I completely 100% agree, and I think it's a really critical thought. One of the other things I would say is that I think the final shows for game programs are getting better and better. And I think that the games that are shown at these final shows are getting more and more culturally diverse and uniquely expressive. And they're models in a lot of ways, right? They're models for what young people, specifically people getting out of school, want in their games. So in a way, they provide almost a temperature taking of what young designers want to work on, what they want to play, what they're interested in. So I think, as you look at these fantastic programs that are these online. During COVID, we have these online programs of all these shows. One of the great things about it is that usually we just go to our own shows, right? So I go and see the USC games because that's what I have time and location to do. But now I can go to all the shows, right? And it's great. I can go to, the NYU shows. I can go to the Santa Cruz shows. I can go to any shows I want, right? Because they're online. And so there's this brilliant thing that's happened, is that suddenly we get to see each other's shows and we can be influenced by each other, I think, in really great ways. So perhaps that's something that possibly could come to stay. I know we're thinking about that, staying online with our final show, specifically for some of that, that possibility. So I wonder if we're going to see that continue for a number of institutions as well. So I want to kind of jump to this question that I skipped before, which is, what are some of the most I'm sorry, I'm such a positive person. What are some of those wonderful things, programs, like announcements, platforms, like what are some of the most wonderful things that you have seen recently in regards to indie games? Announcements, possibilities, grants, like what have you seen out there? Let's share these things that you've seen with everyone else. And also people in the chat can shout it out, right? If you've seen wonderful things too. So we're not the only ones out there seeking opportunities and interesting possibilities. Who wants to jump in? Hesi, you want to jump in?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, the things that I have experienced actually recently was the Akados Launchpad, which is the why co-founded the little indie little company that we did because we won the grant. And they recently opened again, and I know also friends at USC who have won the grant last year, right? So this has been an interesting opportunity for I think ideas, or just things that you ever thought, and even if you don't have an idea, you can just go in and meet people and wonderful people who are interested in VR, passionate about VR, and want to do new things, right? So I think they recently opened, and that to me has been a really wonderful experience to help some of the indie developers. So I think things like that, or the Games for Change grant that I recently, the last year I also saw, where they were because of because of COVID and the pandemic, they were trying to make indie developers make their games like STEM like games, right? So kids can play them online. and so on. So programs like this, I think, are really awesome because they're supporting indie developers for all their work, right? I think it comes very often where we and I know most friends and developers who are in the industry, they also do develop their own projects on the side, right? So I think it's awesome to have that opportunity to be able to work on your passion project and perhaps get some money involved in it, right? So I think to me that has been really awesome things that has happened to indies recently.
Wonderful. Those are great examples. Jake, how about you? What are some amazing things you've seen coming out for indies?
Yeah, definitely second all of the grants and seeing in the university level, like with a lot of senior games, people are getting, they graduate, not a super huge amount, but enough to like really consider budgets and like prepare for an online release, like really consider what they want their career as an indie developer to be, if it's publishing your own games or preparing to join up with a larger group. But for me, yeah, the kind of wonder and excitement I have is around just the kind of increased global conversations on justice and the role of media creators to help share that information. And with the charity bundles for racial justice and the most recent one for Palestine, which did amazing. Just this kind of ongoing process of learning more about how to do better self-education and discussions within the studio cultures, but also discussions with those audiences of the people that play the games, using that platform. I know it's always a really complicated conversation to have in terms of how to not speak over the people who are already most affected by it and are doing the work to try and get their voice out, but how to boost it and recognize that culture is that vector for learning for so many people that aren't as online or don't like want to engage with news culture at all and have just kind of the base assumptions that society and their school system might have given them. When they really respect creators, then hearing them be passionate about these global causes or especially local ones too. I think that's a big thing of like getting more connected to your directly local community, volunteering as development groups as you can, just put that into your practice of how you spend your time as an organization, and just trying to learn more and do better. I think it's kind of pretty early for the games community as a whole of like figuring out how to do better to support everyone that makes up that community worldwide.
Awesome. I think that's fantastic. I want to shout out a couple of things, more possibilities. Like I want to give a shout out to the Unity for Humanity grants that I saw recently. This particular set that just closed last week was in regards to ideas for the environment. Game ideas that are around climate change and the environment. So I think that's that's a great cause. I know they're going to have some other openings and opportunities. That's fantastic for a game engine platform, to give a lift to indies. And then, not to be USC game centric, but we just launched, and the credit really goes to Jim Huntley and Danny Bilson, but we just launched the Jerry Lawson Endowment for Black and Indigenous students in game design and engineering. With this is a scholarship fund supported currently by Take-Two and hopefully by other folks in industry that will provide funding for students to, be able to come to a premier program like USC. Whereas maybe they would have chosen, not to come to school to just try and do it on their own or something. And I think, finding a way to help Black and Indigenous game makers to come to a program that, like other programs, has a lot of benefits associated with it, but they do come at a cost, right? So we want to find ways to support those people for sure. And so I hope that this is not the only program like that at a university that we see very soon, right? I'm getting a lot of stuff in the chat. I'm not able to follow it, but apparently people enjoy the fact that I'm an optimist. And thank you. I appreciate this discussion around optimism myself because, it's especially this past year, right? It's been critical. It's been difficult, but it's critical. And I think as an indie, right? You have to keep working, and you think, well, is anybody ever going to play this game? Optimism is just a survival skill. Staying optimistic is a survival skill. So let's try to do that. Do you guys have anything you wanted to add to these shout outs, or anything I didn't catch here? I'm seeing mentions of grant programs at the Department of Ed, NSF, NEH, and more. These are wonderful opportunities, especially for folks in academia or nonprofits. And of course, we can't go without shouting out IndieCade itself, right, for providing such a platform as this for emerging game designers. And this specific conference is focusing on those horizons, and so we can't go without saying that. So I just wanted to spend a second here. We're going to do our rallying cries in a minute. But I do want to spend a second here plugging the second day of Horizons tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll be streaming games from 6 different schools. And on Discord, we're going to have active conversations and networking going on. So speaking of optimism, come participate, be part of the community. Don't miss this opportunity. Folks at IndieCade are the most optimistic people I know. That's why they're here after all these years doing this for you guys, right? So that's what I want to say. We have a few minutes left. We're getting a warning, but I want to come back to this idea of a rallying cry for the future, right? Because I know it's a silly idea. I love giving silly assignments. My students know. I'll go first, okay? So my rallying cry for the future is very, very simple, and that is everyone plays. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you want to play, everyone plays. Play is universal. We love it. We feel it. We acknowledge it. We don't disregard it. And we support it. And that's my rallying cry for the future. Everyone plays. I want to pass it to my young friends. And what is your rallying cry for the future? Jake, go.
Let's have open discussions about play and culture. I think, as you said, everyone plays, like from people doing crosswords to chess to playground games to just coming up with weird word games at the dinner table, to the whole multimedia sphere that we're already in. I think all of those things are very real parts of life and contribute so much, and allow people to acknowledge and try different perspectives, different ways of thinking. And I think it's a shame that still on the kind of the broader side, it's a played out conversation in indie games, but as a society, it gets, play can be looked down upon. It's a waste of time. You're not doing your homework. You're not rising and grinding or anything like that. But I think it's so much of what makes life worth living.
Hear, hear. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to me that one of the oldest forms of entertainment and social interaction is not already something that we discuss as a kind of cultural foundation, I almost want to say, of society and our lives. We think of it as trivial, when what we really need to think about is we should be learning. We should be learning from play. We should be learning better how to be better citizens, how to be better, family members, how to be better partners, how to be better friends and team members, and how to have more fun and in our lives, and how to make them more meaningful. All those things. So I'm here on your rallying cry. Hesi, do you want to round us out with your rallying cry?
Sure. So mine, it would be serious can be playful, and not because it's playful, it is not serious, right? Not because it's playful, it's not serious. So I think that's something that I don't know, that I'm passionate about. I love thinking about ethics. I love thinking about culture, and those, and my passion is making games. So one of the things that I just love making is it's experimental weird things about those things, right? So yeah, that would be my rallying cry. Just like make weird stuff, make things about serious topics, but it can definitely be playful.
Wonderful. Obviously, I'm full support of that as well. I don't see. You know what? I saw a rallying cry earlier up there, which is keep games weird. And so I'm going to shout that one
Right.
out for sure. I hope that the folks in the audience have enjoyed our rallying cries for the future, have enjoyed our discussion about indie games, intersections, things that matter, and the future. And we really appreciate you coming, even though we were a replacement for the irreplaceable Robin Hunicke. One more shout out to Robin, and thank you to the folks at IndieCade for inviting us to have this discussion. Hope you stay for day 2 of Horizons. Hope you play some games. Hope you watch some streaming and have some great conversations. Thanks again for everyone in the chat too. Lovely to see you all. Take care. And I think that's a wrap for, I think we're a wrap for day 1, everyone. Everyone plays.